Warning. This episode contains material that some may find distressing.
This is Adopters Anonymous. Anything you say here is in the strictest confidence.
We've had a bit of a difficult week this week. My daughter's been in hospital and my son has handled it really, really well. But we have had a couple of little bits. And I know the trigger for both of them. So the first one was the other night. He wanted to go out with his friends on the street, but I'd given him his meds, his bedtime meds. So me telling him no, he couldn't go out turned into a meltdown, spitting, kicking, biting. And when he saw that I wasn't giving in and I was being calm and not giving the wrong facial expression, not giving the wrong tone of voice, he escalated it and got a kitchen knife. It's the only kitchen knife we've got in the house, and we try and put it in a place where he can't reach, but he reached it and he came at me with it. Now, will he ever go through with it and try and stab me? I don't know. But he swung it a few times at me, but he wasn't anywhere near me. But I calmly told him not to do it and bided my time, waited for the moment where I could take it away from him safely, where both of us wouldn't get hurt. Put it away. And eventually we calmed down, we went to bed and he fell asleep. This morning he said he wanted to go to school early so we'd be there first in the queue, which he's done, but that means that his PA can't go with him. She has to get her child to school. So I said, I'll come with you. Unbeknownst to us is he'd hatched a plan. And as soon as that front door was open, he ran off, saying he wanted a normal life and wanted to go to a normal school. So we quickly got in the car, drove round to the road where he was. I got out of the car. We had a bit of a struggle for about 5 minutes getting him back in the car. But I said to Jeanette, you drive, I'll get in the back with him. We locked the windows so he couldn't wind the windows down, child locks were on, and I sat in the back with him. And it was chaotic. He was spitting at me, biting me, trying to get at his mum, not having his seatbelt on, being in the footwell. All the way through it, I remained calm and worked really hard on not using the wrong tone of voice.
Who are these people?
These extraordinary people, they are adoption superheroes, truly astonishing folk.
Man, these people are heroes.
Episode 2, Pace.
I had to restrain him a few times because he wanted to get into the front seat to his mum to try and get her to stop the car. Eventually we got into school. By the time we got to the bottom of the drive of the school, he was in the boot of the car. But, we're doing 10 mile an hour on a private driveway, so got him out of the car. He was sorting his jumper out. Staff were there to help us. I sorted his collar out, told him his zip was down on his trousers, and then I gave him an hug. And off he went into school. So, yeah, I definitely used pace, and that I think subconsciously in the past I must have. But when you're in the thick of it, when you're in the middle of a meltdown, it is so easy to hit that default button and shout and talk in the wrong tone and give the wrong loops. It is very difficult. But yeah, we will keep going. We will keep trying to get it right.
A few things happened last week that led to a discussion in our WhatsApp group about ways of dealing with difficult situations. And today we're going to be looking at something called pace. For me, it's something that I kind of struggle with because, I'm going to be honest, in the moment, if I'm trying to sort something out with a meltdown or a tantrum, don't get so much of those these days, thankfully. It's quite difficult in the moment for me to remember to try it. I just get carried away and captured by the moment, and you kind of end up, well, I do anyway, much to my disappointment of myself, getting cross and yelling, and it does not work. I've found with my boys, yelling, any kind of like punishment or removal of any privileges or something like that. It sounds archaic and old, I know, but anything like that, it just doesn't work. So you got to find a way of doing things to make a difference and try and make them see.
Hi Mart, what is pace? What the fudge is pace? Fudge is a new word from his son that he occasionally uses instead of the other one.
Well, Carl, I can answer that. PACE is a therapeutic model of parenting. It's an acronym that stands for playfulness, acceptance, curiosity, and empathy. Developed by Dr. Dan Hughes, an American clinical psychologist. It's been around since the late 1990s, early noughties. He worked with children who experienced trauma, neglect, or disrupted attachment. It's not a therapy in itself, but a way of being with your child that builds trust and safety, especially for children with tough early experiences. So, for example, if your child is in the midst of a meltdown, it goes like this. Playfulness. Instead of going in guns blazing, it's a lighter touch. This is not always easy to do, and it is a different approach to how peers may choose to parent, and definitely not the way a regular school would tackle a problem. Acceptance. Acceptance is about letting your child know, I accept you no matter what you're feeling. You're showing that you tolerate their inner world even when it's messy. This helps to reduce their feelings of shame and fear. Curiosity. This tends to come after the dust has settled and is something like, I wonder what made you so angry just now, instead of, why did you do that? It opens the door to connection rather than slamming it shut with blame. And empathy. This one's huge. It's the feeling of, I get it, that must have been really hard for you. It shows your child that their emotions are valid and that they're not alone. But perhaps the main challenge is for the parents to remember to use it or know how to.
I'm the same as you. I struggle with pace. But I think it's been in the forefront of my mind recently, especially this week since we've been talking about it. And I think looking back on it, I think I must use it. I do it at default setting occasionally, and I use the wrong tone of voice, and I use the wrong facial expressions. But like you say, when you're in that moment, in that meltdown, it is so difficult to use pace. But I've definitely used it in the last couple of incidents we've had this week.
The big thing that happened this weekend is, it was a complete accident, and my little one, I found him walking down the corridor towards the kitchen, and he said to me, bearing in mind he's 10, he said, I'm a fucking idiot. And I went, I beg your pardon? He said, I am a fucking idiot. I said, wait, what are you talking about, and why are you saying that? And he said, Dad, I've broken the TV. Well, I thought, no, he's only messing around. He's obviously done something accidentally and he can't turn the telly on. Anyway, lo and behold, walked into the lounge. There is the TV. And massive kind of big spider's web style crack in the top of it. I didn't explode. I was very calm and I said, listen, are you okay? That's the main thing. What happened? He explained what happened. And I didn't lose my temper. What's the point? Yeah, I was cross, I was annoyed. But there was no point. Anyway, I think he was more gutted than I was. He's probably the person that watches the most TV in the family. there was an argument between me and him about something else, and which led to him yelling at me, wish he hadn't been adopted by me. But again, as he's getting older, he uses these sort of phrases, but he doesn't mean them, and he soon apologises. So I guess what I'm saying is, I think that PACE is a very good tool if you remember it and if you do it right. It's hard to do it in the moment, and I think it becomes habitual. The more you do it, the more you remember to do it, the better it becomes. But I'm sure others of you have very different experiences, and I'm sure other members of this group have as well. So yeah, I'd be keen to hear.
The truth is, using PACE can be very hard at times, especially in the heat of the moment. And when you're living with a child who's constantly pushing boundaries, rejecting connection, or in emotional crisis, responding with empathy instead of frustration is a huge ask. For a start, it goes against your instincts. Rather than seeing red, you need to stay connected, and this is not easy. PACE isn't a quick fix. There's no script, you're on your own, and it's about building a relationship moment by moment, especially when things go wrong. And if you're exhausted, PACE can feel impossible. To make matters worse, it doesn't always get immediate results. Attempts to calm the situation may be met with rejection or rage. That doesn't mean it's not working. It means your child's defences are strong, and it will take repetition, safety, and time to break through. And your own life history plays a role. If you didn't grow up in a safe, secure environment, using PACE can feel foreign or even uncomfortable. But even though it's hard, PACE creates a felt sense of safety. And for traumatised children, that's gold dust. It helps regulate emotions, builds trust, and gives children a new template for relationships. Over time, it can be transformational.
Well, you know what? I went on a PACE course, which was 12 weeks of 2-hour sessions, one or two a week. So it was about as in-depth as you could go into the subject, I think. And my conclusion about it is that if you use PACE consistently, you get marginally less fucked up conversations than if you don't. It's not a panacea for getting it right every time. It's a slightly less aggressive way of trying to calm them down. But you can pace your way through a whirlwind child and it doesn't make a difference whatsoever. So it's not a guarantee of success. It's a stacking the odds in your favour that you're likely to fail less.
And do you think part of it is about calming you down as the individual as well?
Totally.
It may sound far-fetched, but for Chris, using PACE may well have saved his life.
My son is prone to, you guys have all experienced it, is prone to fairly serious outbursts of dysregulated behaviour. And they've got more complicated, not because they got more common, but because he's got bigger. And as he swings around and, hurls things at you, he is taller, stronger than he was when he was 4 or 5 years of age. So it's become more of a problem for that reason alone. Recently-ish, there was an incident where he was with me for the weekend. We were having a lovely father-son moment. He was lying on my chest on the sofa. We were watching Paw Patrol on the TV. And I actually wondered if he'd gone to sleep because he was so calm, so quiet. And he just looked up at me and I looked down at him, and it was one of those bonding moments that you just think, this is why we do it. And it was idyllic, really. And he looked up, said, "Daddy, I'm a bit hungry. Do you mind if I get a packet of crisps?" And I said, "No, of course you can. They're in the kitchen." So he goes into the kitchen and he didn't get a bag of crisps. What he did was he opened a mid-cycle dishwasher and took out a 6-inch carving knife. Came back into the living room, put the knife to my throat and announced quite calmly, "I'm going to kill you now, Daddy." Now, in these sort of mists of rage or otherworldly experiences, that was a very realistic possibility. So I realised, And I'm trying to think, pace. What does it stand for again? What am I supposed to do? And I think it came more from instinct than training, but I tried to make light of it. And I just said to him, you don't want to do that, son. He said, just imagine if you kill Daddy now, you're going to be hungry in about an hour, and who's going to make you dinner? And I looked at him, and his pupils were totally dilated. His mouth had got froth on the sides of it. He'd gone a curious shade of greyish white. And he lowered it like a sort of, reluctant aggressor. And he went, yeah, good point. And he put the knife down, and he lay down back on me, and we carried on as if nothing had happened. And then the sea came in, the curiosity, and I said to him, why do you think you did that? And he had no recollection of what he'd done whatsoever. It was as if it had not happened. He said, what do you mean? I said, holding that knife to Daddy. He said, I didn't hold a knife to Daddy. Yeah, that knife there that's, on the sofa. No, not me. And it was genuine. He genuinely didn't know he'd done it. And that's frightening. A wrong move from me there, and it could have been very different. And if that could have been my wife or my daughter or the dog, or, that's a tough situation to face. And I think it was as much fluke and luck as it was technique. But I think if I'd have flown into a rage at that time, it could have been quite a different outcome. So I do think pace has its place. And I think that was definitely the time and the place to use it.
So after that had happened then, Chris, I don't know about you, I'd have dwelled on that quite a lot and had to talk to someone about it. What did you do with that, what had happened to you with your son at that stage?
Nothing while he was with me. The cardinal rule of never discuss the kids in front of the kids is something that we just don't breach. Doesn't matter how mad we get, we keep that rule sacrosanct. So when I was taking him back to his mum's house, I said, can I have a word for a minute? And we went into the kitchen and I explained everything that had happened. And it wasn't dissimilar to a couple of incidents that had happened at her house. Now, what? Just consider the sort of lunacy of this situation, that her house is on the police register as an immediate response if ever there's a call from it, because there is likely to be a serious threat to life. And that serious threat to life is provided by an 8-year-old child. So I think the gravity of that was not lost on us, to be honest. We had the option 3 years ago to consider a residential option for our son, because all the signs that this was going to happen and was going to get worse were all evident. And we turned it down. We said, no, we don't believe we've exhausted every other possibility. And I think to have any clarity of conscience, we'd need to have that confidence that we've done everything possible. Literally a voluntary section 20, as it's called, had to be a last resort. I think when we've each had what the police deem serious threat to our lives, I think we can safely tick that box.
Carl relates to Chris's experience.
I've had a knife, not to my throat, but several times I've had him come at me with a knife. And, his development since leaving mainstream and going into specialist provision, he's come on leaps and bounds. It's unbelievable the difference that's made. But the other thing as well that's similar is our youngest daughter, she suffered because of what my son's done. And he wants the attention, but he doesn't know how to get it. So unfortunately, some of the times it's a negative way of getting it. And then there's the other bit where he doesn't want to compete with his sister to get our attention. So he pushes her buttons until she storms off and locks herself in a bedroom. The other thing is that bit where you were on about your son not recollecting any of that situation. I've seen many reels where like teenagers have been talking about meltdowns, and I know your son's might not have been a meltdown, but it may be the same kind of brain function that happens. So when you have a meltdown, when you come out of the meltdown, you've got no recollection of what you've done. It's as if your brain, as a self-preservation, erases that memory. And I'm wondering whether, you know, okay, it wasn't a meltdown, he was very calm, but I'm wondering whether his brain's just erased it for self-preservation. But that bit where you're saying about the eyes have gone, when my son's come at me with a knife, and when he's in meltdown as well, he's not there. It's not him. It's as if a switch has been flicked and there's just no control.
The identification of the triggers is the hardest bit, and I think we've reached the conclusion that sometimes there aren't any visible ones. You know, my son was born to a working prostitute, and we've discovered that, for example, he has a fear of raised male voices. If any man shouts, it has a real impact on him. Now, you can only imagine where that's come from, because obviously an awful lot of these experiences are pre-birth, and they store them dramatically, and they, you know, he might smell a smell and that triggers him, and we can't smell it, we don't know it, and he can't point his finger to it and say, this happened, Daddy, that's why I started to go a bit crazy. It's something that's, you know, reptilian brain driven, really, rather than anything conscious.
Carl, to bring it back to the pace that we were talking about as well, and you were saying that your son's come at you with knives and things like that, but you've also, I mean, you've sent them pictures to me of what damage he's done. So how do you, in that situation, restrain him without hurting him, restrain yourself without hurting him and yourself? I mean, what goes through your mind?
So, you know, them injuries that I've sent you, I haven't had for a while, because I think he has, with the help of the school, the support we've got from the services now, I do think, especially with school, he has got a little bit of self-regulation, but it does still crop up. I mean, this morning, he ripped his nail off last night, so his socks felt uncomfortable. Socks are the bane of my life. It is 10 minutes in the morning, every morning, that I dread, because it could be 15, 20 minutes, and numerous pairs of socks. So I put his socks on, they didn't feel right. And he said, I've ripped my toenail off, why don't you fucking listen to me, you fucking dickhead? Slapped me and tried to kick me. And I'm like,
let's make it clear, that was him, not you. That's not your parenting style.
I haven't tried that parenting style yet. But so I tried to have a look at his toe. He wouldn't let me. He called me a dickhead again and tried to kick me. And then I said to him, these white socks, exactly the same make. I said, they do feel softer than the black ones. I said, so what I'll do is, next time I wash them, I'll put softener on the socks. And I said, and we'll see whether we can get them, you know, back to being as soft as the white ones. And he went, yeah, that's fine, that is, Dad. So put his socks on, made sure the lines were in the right place, made sure there was no lumps by his toes, put his shoes on. And I said, are they okay? And he went, yeah, because I can tell by the look on his face when I put them on, right or wrong. He got up. I said, brush your teeth. Brush your teeth. He says, right, have a good day at school. He gave me a hug and off he went. Unfortunately, he's now back home because he didn't make it to school. I think there's something going on, meds-wise and hormones-wise, but I have used Pace massively recently, But going back to when it was really bad, he's not there. He's gone. He's biting, scratching, punching, throwing anything he can at me. It's biding your time to see that little glimmer when you have a window of opportunity to get in, and either get in and grab him as safe as you can, take him down to the floor and lie on top of him, because it's that deep pressure that used to work for my son. And having me on top of him, giving him that deep pressure, and then talking in his ear in a calm voice. That, sometimes it's really hard when you're in it to do it. And sometimes I got it wrong. Sometimes it worked, and we get up and he'd be fine. Other times I get up, and as soon as he got himself free, he'd just start again. But there are similar things with you and me, Chris. There was a time where my eldest daughter and her partner were locked in one room. My youngest daughter was locked in another room, and my wife and myself were locked in our bathroom. And my son was smashing the house. And that was one of the times where we ran the EDT team, knew what was going on, and said, ring the police. And at that point where we were, there was no way PACE was working. But it's definitely since we had the conversations about PACE, I have massively used it. And like you said, Chris, the more you use it, the easier it is for you to embrace PACE, and it helps you to stay calm. I think you've got to have an understanding in your own brain that sometimes it's going to work and other times it isn't, and you've just got to ride the storm.
You know what, as well, I think one of the saddest things for me about PACE is that it's tagged and labelled as a mechanism for managing SEN children.
Yeah, definitely.
I wish I'd known about PACE when I had my neurotypical children, because it's not a specialist technique. It's a logical, sensible way of raising your family. And with things like, playfulness and curiosity and empathy and low arousal techniques and other things that fall into the same bracket as specialist techniques for SEN kids, I wish it was part of the curriculum in schools so that teachers use it and managers use it in the workplace. Who wants to be told, you're bad, you're naughty, if you do this wrong, you will be punished in this way, rather than let's have a conversation about why you might have done that, and we'll see if we can address it in a different way.
I wonder if people like the police forces use it.
You know what, Mark? And the sad thing about this, I think they do, but I think they reserve those types of techniques for interrogation of criminals, not for ways of dealing with people, not for ways of trying to diffuse situations.
Actually, UK police forces don't formally use PACE as an official framework. Some police officers and community policing teams are trained in trauma-informed practice, and those principles we've heard discussed, empathy, curiosity, non-judgmental stance, may be incorporated into communication styles, but it's not a standard universally adopted policing model. But maybe it should be, because
when you shout at your neurotypical child, what do you actually gain from it? All you're gaining is you're getting rid of your frustration. You're not resolving anything, are you? Apart from getting rid of your frustration because you're shouting. So, like you say, it shouldn't just be for SEN children. It is a really good tool for parents of neurotypical children to use.
That's great if you are practicing mindfulness on a Friday morning when there's nothing else to do. When your child is kicking you, it's quite hard to say to them, okay, I think what the difference is, we have to snap into that that PACE moment, thinking on our feet, what on earth we're going to be doing really, really quickly. And it has to become almost second nature to think, right, this isn't good. And this is why I fail at it sometimes, but it's also why I'm getting better at it, because I do try it more and more. But it is a real difference. And I think it's a real skill. And as you say, if everyone knew about it, and everyone tried it in more situations, I think the world would be a much calmer place.
The thing about PACE as well, it's when you're on the course and they say, just imagine your child's done this, how might you respond? And you ever think about it and you share your ideas and you put your hand up and you say, well, I'd be tempted to say this. And the class teacher says, yes, congratulations, that's a great response. But as the great philosopher of the 20th and 21st centuries, Mr. Mike Tyson once said, everyone's got a plan till they get punched in the face. And applying the same techniques while you've got blood dripping out of your nose, you're furiously angry, that everything's flying around your ears isn't quite as easy. And that's why I've said that more you practice it when you're calm, the more you can draw on it when you're not, because it becomes more instinctive, more natural, more the default, technique that you fall into.
You say the word default, and I think Martin and myself have said a bit ago that unfortunately our default button was to join the chaos. And it's so easy to do when that chaos is, like you say, somebody coming at you with something, or it's so easy. But so grateful for this podcast to have brought this up, because it really is at the forefront of my mind constantly. Because, like you say, Mark, we live on the edge. Having it in the forefront, it's the look I give, and it's the tone that they are the main tripping points for me. And since we've been talking about this, that's really worked and been really helpful and kind of neutralised what's been the chaos that's been going on. So yeah, it's been a massive thing for us.
Well, I think let me give you a reality check for a minute. I'm talking like I'm some sort of PhD PACE practitioner. 9 times out of 10, I will default to shouting. And it's wrong, and I know it's wrong. And when I'm doing it, I know it's wrong. But it's still my default go-to mechanism, because it's the one I was subjected to as a child.
I was just about to say, Chris, sorry to butt in, but I was just about to say, that is how we were programmed as a child. You did something wrong, you'd either get a slap or you'd be shouted at. And to a degree, like you say, with our neurotypical children, we did exactly the same, because that's how we were brought up. Now, as parents of a neurodiverse child, we've had to parent differently, because we know if we shout at our child, all we will do is we will up the level. We know that shouting does not work. So none of us are experts, but that default is what we were brought up with, and it's so easy to slip into.
Well, I still say, and I know I'm a little biased, but my ex-wife is, in my opinion, the most natural pace performer that I've ever come across. But if you questioned her about it, she would describe it differently. She would say she's perhaps the most practiced, and that's why it comes over as more natural. She makes the effort to use it more. I've been on a course that talks about pace. I've read the odd article. She has read every book on the subject and practiced it and changed her techniques and worked out what works best and advised other people how to do it. And she's become a bit of a sort of doyen of the social circle, where everyone goes to her and say, how would you deal with this? And I have the ultimate respect and admiration for her for that, because she gave me a lesson in it very recently. I'd shouted at our daughter for something that she'd done wrong. It was quite defiant. It wasn't, in the big picture of things, it was trivial, okay? But at the time, it felt like quite a defiant thing that needed to be rectified. So I beat my alpha male chest and told her what she'd done was wrong. And then my ex came to pick her up and take her home. And I explained what had happened. And she dealt with it in an entirely different way. And at the time, I was cross, because I thought it was usurping authority and undermining me. And after reflecting on it, I realized actually it taught me a great lesson, that even after the event, pace is a great technique. I was explaining what I thought was really rude and within seconds, they were laughing at it. But they were both laughing. And after the laughter, my daughter said, yeah, I know what I did was wrong. So that was the technique, to bring it out, to get discussing on it. I then reacted like a petulant child. Whereas in reality, I should have said, thank you for that lesson.
And then you realise they're actually pacing you.
Yeah. I'd been paced. I had been properly paced, and it was But it was the right outcome. It was the right technique, the right outcome, and it was way better than the prehistoric caveman version I was trying to use.
And just on that, and what you were saying about how exploding is what we would do normally, because that's what we got when we were young. What we're doing and what we have the opportunity to do is shape people's lives to react in the future in their adulthood. And I think that's why pace is a really, really good thing to follow if you can remember to do it.
History is the best predictor of the future we've got, unless someone's bold enough to do something differently. And I just think it needs pioneers and people who don't mind being 1 in 100 to step forward and say, you know what, there's another way, and I've found it to be better. And, you know, it only takes 2 or 3 people for a crazy idea to become a mini movement, and then before long it starts rolling down the hill and everybody wonders why they never did it.
Hopefully this is the mini movement.
Well, let's hope so. Let's hope so. Yes, indeed. I'd love to think in some small way we can have a little mini effect along those lines.
Pace is just one aspect of therapeutic parenting, and it's a theme that will be talked about a lot in this series. Why people choose to adopt can be complex. It can be straightforward too, but the decision is never easy, and it's never taken lightly. There's no question that your life will change. Anyone that thinks otherwise is either truly gifted or lying to themselves. Data from October 2024 suggested that approximately 2,600 children in England are waiting to be adopted. In early 2025, there were approximately 1,540 approved adoptive families in England waiting to be matched with children. So the number of children awaiting adoption exceeds the number of approved adoptive families. Recent data highlights a shortfall of 780 families, meaning there are 780 more children with a plan for adoption than there are approved adopters ready to be matched. So why did our group of dads decide to adopt?
My wife and myself have 2 biological children, 2 girls. Our eldest wanted a brother, but she ended up with a sister. Yeah, their relationship, it's been really, really good for quite a few years now. Growing up together, it was a little difficult at times, but they are 2 beautiful young ladies. You know, my family was done. I was happy. You know, I got my 2 girls. But my wife mentioned fostering a couple of times, and I was like, no, I'm not interested in that. But then she said to me, you know, something's got to change. So either you need to find a job where you're paid better, or we need to start fostering. So at the time I loved my job. So yeah, we started fostering, did all the training, and you know, eventually got placed with a little girl. She stayed with us for a little bit, and then she moved on. And then we went and picked this 4-day-old little boy up from hospital. He was tiny, and he was our second placement. And yeah, he stayed. I think the reasons were, I mean, one of the reasons were that, you know, we fell in love with him and treated him like he was our son, and it's no different. The love for our adopted son is no different from the love for our biological children. You know, he's my son. You know, there's no difference. But you know, it was getting to the time where the decision had been made for my son to be adopted, and you know, we put ourselves forward. We were told by a social worker that, you know, we'd have to jump through hoops because there would be families out there who'd want to adopt him. But we knew that the best thing for my son would be for him to stay with us, so he wouldn't have that extra layer of trauma. And thankfully, our wishes were granted. There's been a lot of ups and downs, but I don't have any regrets. And, I wouldn't change him for the world. What I would do, what I'd love to be able to do, is change the world for him.
Yeah, we got married, we started trying for kids. We were told we'd never have kids, naturally. And yeah, so she called me just before she went on a handy and said, I'm pregnant, which was like just incredible. So we, after feeling, immense sort of frustration and, we'd got all the drugs and everything for fertility treatment, we'd done the clinic and all that kind of stuff. We'd not started the treatment, but yeah, at that point we found out that, Ellie was pregnant, and that was really fantastic. And obviously we wanted more kids. So we came back round to talking about adoption. We'd already talked about it, so it didn't probably need too much discussion. Yeah, I mean, everyone always talks about how hard the adoption process is. I mean, I'm a bit of an oversharer anyway, because I've got, I guess I'm ADHD, so like when people started coming around and asking me questions about my life, I was quite happy to share just about fucking everything, Yeah, it's a bit like Goonies when they say, "Tell us everything you know, kid." It's like, well, when I was 4, like that. So I quite enjoyed the experience. And when people say, "Oh, it's so terrible," I didn't struggle with that really, because I knew we were good people. So what's to fucking hide?
We went through fertility treatment and we drew a line under that and thought, do you know what, this isn't for us. And then you start thinking, oh, what do we do? What am I here? What do I need to do in my life? What am I here for? And after fertility treatment, we felt like, oh, Jesus, what a slog. I think that you have that situation where there's only so much that you can take at the time. I'd had cancer, and when the IVF doesn't work and you find out it doesn't work, I think we needed a break from everything that was happening. We also realised we didn't want to go into adoption thinking these are going to be, or this child or whatever is going to be a replacement for my family. We wanted to make sure this is a different kind of way of having a family. You start the process and you get the ball rolling, and then all the training took place. We went to all the training, and I remember someone talking to us as a big group, and someone coming out and saying, the child I adopted used to smear shit down the stairs, and we'd go, oh, that sounds awful. And then she'd say something like, yeah, but that's not the bad stuff. And you think, absolutely right. It's what you can't see and neglect and all that stuff. But that's why we chose the path we chose. I was in a group of, 40 or so people, and I'd say the majority of them were there to adopt babies.
No matter what people said.
Yeah. So we sat there, and I remember one guy, and he said, I adopted a 6-year-old girl, and the reason I did that was because she could communicate and she wasn't a closed book. And so that's what we kind of committed ourselves to. And then, as we haven't said much about this, I don't know how things have changed. So we adopted 7 years ago, and the process to meet the children, selecting the children, is absolutely horrible. I think it's like you get a magazine or a book, or you go online and you peruse children. It's like fucking horrible. It's the weirdest thing in the world. It's kind of like, I don't know how you deal with it, but you kind of get your head around it and you think, don't dismiss on looks, don't dismiss on this, that and the other, or all those things. And then we went to adoption days where you meet lots of kids, and it's like a day, and it's like, cut a long story short, we're looking through the website, and I said to Rach one day, oh, there's our kids. And I looked at my youngest and I saw his face. And he was putting this face. He's got this smile. He couldn't smile. And he was looked like he was grimacing. And he was probably about 2.5 at the time. And I said to Rach, they're our kids. And so we spoke to a social worker who then said, yeah, okay, well, leave it with me. This was probably, I think it was November. And so she tried to find out more about it. Nothing happening. Couldn't get hold of their site. Couldn't get any information for 4 or 5 months. We'd forgotten about them. Absolutely forgotten about them, and just moved on with life. And then, out of the blue, I think, 5 or 6 months later, she came back to us and said, "Those boys, they've finally got back to me, and yeah, you are one couple who, out of a selection, who could be a good match for them." Got to the point where, we were agreed that we could have these kids.
I suppose our adoption journey was very similar to a lot of people's, I would imagine. We tried naturally for children, unsuccessfully to start with. We then went through 3 unsuccessful rounds of IVF, which I have to say is, even irrespective of the outcome, that's a really traumatic experience to go through. There's so much hormonal and chemical imbalance, and you see the person you love the most so anxious and suffering with artificial ways of treating their body, and then to have an outcome that is so binary, it works or it doesn't, and if it doesn't, you're facing the whole thing again in a few months' time. So we had 3 rounds of that, all of which were unsuccessful. And then adoption was, I suppose, the last resort, and I think a lot of people maybe see it that way. It is now obviously the way that we came to have the family we have, so it doesn't feel like a last resort. It feels like the ideal way and technique to use. But we adopted both our children. Our daughter came to us at 1 year and a day old. She was born and fostered originally in North London, and our son came to us at 6 days old on a foster to adopt basis. He was born withdrawing from crack cocaine. His birth mother decided she'd have a last binge before giving birth, and for 6 days it was touch and go if he was going to pull through. But having done so, we took him home on a foster to adopt basis, and eventually adopted him after 6 to 9 months, something like that. It was a little quicker than with our daughter. So that's the mechanism by which we came to adopt. A lovely story actually about our daughter. Because of my age and the fact that I'd already got 2 birth children from my first marriage, we were a little down the pecking order in terms of getting newborn children and the like. And we ended up with this magazine called Children Who Wait, which sounds very sweet, but it's awful reading through the pages of this thing. It's for harder to adopt children because they may be part of sibling groups or a little bit older or have quite a significant backstory that would take some adjusting to. And it's like a catalogue for children. So you flick through and you think, yes, I like the look of that one, and then you make an inquiry. Well, my wife saw a picture of our daughter on there and said to me, "That's our daughter." She seemed mentally to bypass the panel process and the selection process and the intros process and boldly declared that it was our daughter. So we made some inquiries the following day, and the social worker from North London basically said, "I'm really sorry that she's just been placed with a family and it's awaiting final approval." I relayed that story back to my wife, who was surprisingly unconcerned because she seemed determined that for whatever reason wasn't going to work out. And she said, no, that's going to fall through. I tell you now, that's our daughter. I am convinced of it. So we left it for a couple of weeks. We didn't really cover any extra options. I was getting a bit concerned at one point that we might miss the boat because my wife's determination was so strong. But then all of a sudden, she decided today's the day we need to chase. So we phoned the social worker, and the response was, wow, your timing is amazing. The process has just fallen through with the chosen couple. If you're still interested, we will put you forward to the panel and we'll see if we can move towards introductions. So something somewhere told my wife that was meant to be. Our daughter's 12 years old now and an absolute angel. So I'm so happy that it turned out the way it did. We found out about our son before we knew he was son. We knew he was unborn baby. And it was on my wife's 40th birthday. So that was probably the best present ever. And when he was born, we were warned, as I say, of his condition because he was so poorly when he was born. But from 6 days old, they came together. And adoption for us, it's interesting. We don't view it as they are still adopted children. Adoption was the mechanism by which they became our children. They are now our children. So whether it be adoption, IVF, natural conception, adoption is the mechanism by which our children became our children. And they wear it as a badge of honor as well. So that's our story about how we came to adopt.
Thanks for listening to Adopters Anonymous. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you've listened to this so that you don't miss an episode. And next time we'll be finding out exactly what challenges the children face and what the parents need to do to address these challenges. Please get in touch if you want to share your experiences or offer advice to our courageous group of adopters. Our email address is adopters.anonymous@gmail.com.